Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, you'll uncover lost teachings that Buddhist masters have passed down through generations to ease a troubled heart and bring lasting calm. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. What I'm about to share with you are forgotten stories from ancient times. Simple tales that hold incredible power to quiet your mind and heal your spirit. These stories have been helping people find peace for over 1,000 years, and tonight they're here for you. Each one carries a hidden truth that can change how you think about your problems, your fears, and the endless noise that keeps you awake at night. You won't find these stories in most books. They've been carefully kept by wise teachers who understood something we've mostly forgotten. Real peace comes not from getting what we want, but from understanding what we already have. The great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Sometimes your joy is the source of your smile, but sometimes your smile can be the source of your joy." Tonight, you'll see how these timeless truths can shift everything. As you listen to these remarkable tales, something beautiful will start to happen. The heavy feeling in your chest will begin to lift. Your racing thoughts will slow down and settle. You'll feel yourself melting into a place of deep understanding and true rest. So get comfortable now. Let your whole body relax into whatever supports you. Take a gentle breath with me, and as you let it go, know that you're about to receive ancient wisdom that has been waiting centuries just for this moment. Let us explore our first story about the difference between technical mastery and spiritual expression. This is the calligrapher's circle. In the cultural heart of ancient Japan lived a calligrapher whose reputation for technical excellence was legendary throughout the realm. His brushstrokes were mathematically precise, his characters perfectly proportioned, his compositions flawlessly balanced. Nobles commissioned him for their most important documents, and his scrolls commanded enormous prices in the markets. Yet despite his worldly success, he felt something essential was missing from his art, some mysterious quality that the Zen masters called the spirit of the brush. Determined to unlock this secret, he traveled to a remote mountain monastery to study with a renowned Zen master known for his own calligraphy. The master's work was prized not for its technical perfection, but for its spiritual power. Pieces that seemed to breathe with life, characters that conveyed meaning beyond their literal content. Upon arriving at the monastery, the calligrapher bowed deeply before the master. "Honored teacher," he said, "I have mastered every technical aspect of our art, yet I sense there is something beyond technique that I do not understand. Please teach me the spirit of the brush." The master nodded and led him to a simple room with paper, ink, and brushes laid out on a low table. "Show me your skill," he said, settling onto a cushion. "Paint an enso, a Zen circle." The calligrapher felt confident. He had painted thousands of circles over the years, and this was among the most basic exercises. He prepared his ink with practiced precision, selected the perfect brush, and centered himself in meditation posture. With a single, controlled breath and a lifetime of training guiding his hand, he created a mathematically perfect circle. The line was consistent, the form precise, the closure exact. It was technically flawless. The master examined the circle for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "No," he said quietly. "This is not alive. It is a cage, drawn by your mind's desire for control. Try again." Confused but determined, the calligrapher attempted another circle, this time focusing on being more spontaneous while maintaining his technical precision. Again, the result was flawless by any measure he understood. Again, the master rejected it. This one is even more dead than the first. You are thinking too much. Let the brush move itself. This pattern continued for hours. Circle after circle emerged from the calligrapher's brush, each one technically superior to anything most artists could produce, yet each one rejected by the master as lifeless, controlled, or dead. With each rejection, the calligrapher's frustration mounted. His usual confidence evaporated. His careful technique began to falter under the pressure of repeated failure. Finally, after dozens of attempts and growing exhaustion, the calligrapher's composure shattered completely. In a moment of total frustration and defeat, he slammed his brush down onto the paper with no thought of technique, control, or outcome. The result was a messy, splattered, incomplete circle, rough edges, uneven thickness, ink bleeding chaotically beyond intended boundaries. He threw the brush down in disgust and buried his face in his hands. "I cannot do it," he cried. "I will never understand what you seek." The master leaned forward and carefully lifted the paper with the crude, imperfect circle. For the first time that day, his face lit up with genuine delight. "Ah!" he exclaimed, his eyes bright with joy. This one has life. This one has a beginning, a breath, a heartbeat. Now you have touched the spirit of the brush." Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. This tale unveils the profound difference between mastery that controls and mastery that flows, between perfection that impresses and expression that transforms. Why do we often lose vitality as we gain expertise? Zen Buddhism points to the subtle way that knowledge can become a prison. As we accumulate techniques, rules, and standards, we can become so focused on avoiding mistakes that we forget the purpose of our practice. Our desire for control gradually strangles the very life force we initially sought to express. The calligrapher's perfect circles represent every area of life where we prioritize technical correctness over authentic expression. Consider the musician so focused on playing every note perfectly that the music loses its soul. The speaker so concerned with saying the right words that their message loses its power. The parent so worried about perfect parenting that they miss opportunities for genuine connection with their child. This isn't an argument against skill or practice. Technical ability provides the foundation for expression. But somewhere in our development, we must learn to transcend technique, to use our skills in service of something larger rather than being enslaved by them. The master wasn't teaching the calligrapher to be careless. He was showing him how to be free. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." The calligrapher's breakthrough came when his expertise finally cracked, allowing beginner's mind to emerge. In that moment of complete surrender, when all his careful control fell away, something authentic could finally express itself through him. Look at your own areas of expertise or competence. Where might your knowledge have become a constraint rather than a tool? Perhaps it's in parenting, where your accumulated wisdom about the right way prevents you from responding freshly to your child's unique needs. Maybe it's in your career, where your professional identity limits your willingness to take creative risks, or in relationships, where your ideas about how love should look prevent you from loving the person actually in front of you. The Buddha said, "Empty your cup so that it may be filled. Become devoid to gain totality." The calligrapher's cup was so full of technique, knowledge, and identity as an expert that there was no room for the spirit to enter. Only when his expertise was exhausted could something alive emerge. This teaching invites us to hold our competence lightly, to remain beginners even as we develop mastery. True expertise includes the wisdom to know when to forget everything we know and respond freshly to the moment at hand. The most powerful speakers often say the words that surprise even them. The most moving artists create beyond their conscious understanding. The most effective leaders respond to situations their training never covered. Tonight, as you consider your own circles of expertise, can you find the courage to occasionally put down your perfect brush and allow something messier but more alive to emerge? What would happen if you approached familiar situations with beginner's mind, fresh eyes, and willingness to be surprised by what wants to express itself through you? As the Buddha taught, the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. All our techniques, all our knowledge, all our perfect circles are merely fingers pointing toward the moon of direct experience. Sometimes we must stop looking at our pointing finger and lift our eyes to see what it's actually showing us. Let us explore a story about finding beauty in brokenness. This is the Master's tea bowl. A wealthy collector of fine art made his way through the mountain path to visit the renowned Zen master, Keun. This collector was known throughout the province for his exquisite taste and generous patronage of the temple. He had sent many precious gifts over the years: porcelain bowls from the capital's finest artisans, silk scrolls painted by celebrated masters, and bronze vessels that gleamed like captured sunlight. As a patron of great standing, he expected to be received with the temple's most treasured possessions. The afternoon sun filtered through ancient pine trees as the two men sat for tea in the temple's modest reception room. The collector settled onto his cushion, anticipating the ceremony would showcase the beautiful pieces he had gifted. Instead, he watched in growing bewilderment as Master Keun reached for a tea bowl that appeared utterly common. Crude earthenware with a large, jagged crack running down its side. The crack had been repaired with golden lacquer that gleamed like a lightning bolt frozen in clay. The collector's practiced eye immediately assessed the piece as worthless. "Master," he said, unable to conceal his dismay, "I have sent you gifts of the finest porcelain from the capital's most skilled craftsmen. These bowls are perfect, without flaw or blemish. Why do you choose to serve tea in this broken, worthless thing?" Master Keun lifted the humble bowl in both hands, feeling its familiar warmth as the tea heated the clay. His weathered fingers traced the golden repair with obvious affection. "You speak truly," he replied with a gentle smile. "Your gifts are indeed perfect. They gleam with technical mastery and remain exactly as they were the day they emerged from the kiln. They have no story to tell because they have never lived." He paused, continuing to hold the cracked bowl with tender reverence. "But this bowl," he said, his thumb following the golden seam, "has journeyed through suffering into wholeness. It was once shattered completely, useless, seemingly beyond repair. Yet here it sits, not hiding its wound, but celebrating it. This crack is not a flaw to be disguised or shame to be hidden. It is the map of its transformation, the proof of its resilience. It is more beautiful for having been broken." The collector looked across the room at his perfect unused bowls displayed pristinely on their shelf, then back at the warm, golden-veined vessel in the master's hands. For the first time, he found himself without words. The Buddha taught, It is in the darkest skies that stars are best seen. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth that emerges from the story of the tea bowl. Our culture obsessively pursues perfection while viewing brokenness as failure. Yet Zen reveals that our wounds often become our greatest teachers, and our scars, our most beautiful features. Why do we instinctively hide our imperfections and celebrate only our polished achievements? Buddhism points to our conditioned mind's deep aversion to suffering and its equally strong attachment to idealized images of success. We learn early to present only our best selves, carefully curating our lives to appear flawless, while secretly carrying shame about our struggles, failures, and the times we've been broken. This tendency toward perfectionism creates a peculiar form of suffering. Like the collector, we admire only what appears untouched by difficulty, missing the profound beauty that emerges from healing. We scroll through social media comparing our inner struggles to others' highlight reels. We hide our mental health challenges, our financial difficulties, our relationship struggles, our career setbacks, all the natural fractures that make us human. The Japanese art of kintsugi, golden repair, embodies this Zen teaching perfectly. Rather than disguising cracks in broken pottery, artisans highlight them with precious metals, creating pieces more valuable than the originals. The philosophy recognizes that breakage and repair are part of an object's history, not something to hide, but to illuminate. Consider your own life's kintsugi moments. Perhaps it was the divorce that taught you self-reliance, the job loss that led to a better career path, the illness that revealed your inner strength, or the addiction that opened your heart to compassion. These experiences, initially devastating, often become the golden seams that make us more beautiful, wise, and capable of helping others. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox captures the essence of accepting our brokenness while remaining open to healing. We don't need to fix ourselves to be worthy of love and respect. We are already whole. Yet our willingness to acknowledge our cracks allows the golden light of wisdom to enter. The Buddha said, "Every experience, no matter how bad it seems, holds within it a blessing of some kind. The goal is to find it." Our task is not to avoid being broken. Life guarantees that we will face difficulties, losses, and failures. Our practice is learning to see these experiences as opportunities for kintsugi, for allowing something more beautiful to emerge from our healing. Tonight, as you reflect on your own journey, can you identify the golden seams that have formed in your life? What breaks have led to breakthroughs? What wounds have become wisdom? Perhaps you can begin to see your imperfections not as flaws to hide, but as proof of your resilience, evidence that you have lived fully and healed courageously. As the Buddha taught, the lotus blooms most beautifully from the deepest and thickest mud. In embracing our brokenness, we discover the golden beauty that can only emerge from having been shattered and choosing to heal. Our next story reveals the weight we carry in our identities. This is the general's name. After decades of commanding armies and conquering territories, the great General Nobutada felt a profound emptiness despite his military glory. The battles that once thrilled him now felt hollow. The victories that once defined him now seemed meaningless. Having spent his entire adult life giving orders and being defined by his rank and achievements, he found himself yearning for something he couldn't name, a peace that had nothing to do with the absence of war. He had heard whispers of a Zen master named Soseki, who lived in a modest monastery high in the mountains. People spoke of this teacher's wisdom in hushed, reverent tones. After his final campaign, instead of returning to his grand estate, Nobutada decided to seek out this master, hoping to find the peace that had eluded him on every battlefield. He arrived at the monastery gates in full ceremonial regalia, his armor polished to mirror brilliance, his family crest displayed prominently on his chest. Decades of command had taught him that presence and authority opened doors, that his name carried weight throughout the realm. "I am General Nobutada," he announced to the small man sweeping leaves near the entrance, his voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to immediate recognition and deference. "Conqueror of the Eastern Province, victor of the Battle of 10 Rivers, defender of the northern borders, I have come to learn the way of Zen." The master, a slight figure in simple robes, continued his sweeping for a moment before looking up. He offered a small bow, the kind one might give to any traveler. "Welcome, friend," Soseki said with gentle warmth. "The mountain path is dusty and the journey long. Please, leave your shoes here before entering." Nobutada straightened, his military bearing instinctively asserting itself. "I am a general of the realm, not a common traveler. Surely you recognize my name and rank." Master Soseki paused in his sweeping and studied the armored figure before him with kind, penetrating eyes. "That name sounds very heavy," he observed quietly. "And that armor must be quite hot in this warm weather. Perhaps you would be more comfortable leaving them here with your shoes. Inside these walls, you are simply a man who has traveled far and may be thirsty. Would you care for some tea?" For the first time in 30 years of military service, General Nobutada felt the actual weight of his identity. Not just the physical armor, but the invisible burden of constantly maintaining his image, his reputation, his carefully constructed sense of self. Standing before this simple man who showed no reaction to his titles or achievements, he experienced a strange lightness, as if he had been holding his breath for decades and could finally exhale. Slowly, uncertainly, he began to remove his armor. Each piece that fell away, the breastplate emblazoned with his victories, the ceremonial sword that had never left his side, the helmet that commanded instant respect, seemed to remove layers of tension he hadn't realized he carried. As he followed the master inside, barefoot and unadorned, he felt lighter than he had since childhood. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you are not your achievements. You are the awareness that observes them all. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding how completely we can become imprisoned by our own identities, wearing them like armor that protects us but ultimately weighs us down. Why do we cling so desperately to our roles, titles, and achievements? Zen Buddhism reveals that the ego mind constantly seeks to solidify itself through identification with external forms. We become the successful entrepreneur, the devoted parent, the respected professional, the spiritual seeker. And while these roles may serve important functions, problems arise when we mistake these temporary identities for our true nature. Consider how much mental energy you spend maintaining your various identities. At work, you may present yourself as competent and confident. With family, you might be the responsible caretaker. On social media, you curate an image of success or happiness. Each role requires its own armor, its own performance, its own careful maintenance. Like General Nobutada, we can become so identified with these roles that we forget who we are beneath them. This identity clinging creates a peculiar form of suffering. We become trapped by our own success, imprisoned by others' expectations, exhausted by the constant effort of maintaining our image. A CEO fears showing vulnerability. A parent feels guilty for having needs. A spiritual teacher struggles to admit confusion. We build elaborate personas and then become slaves to maintaining them. The Buddha taught, attachment is the root of suffering. This applies not only to material possessions, but to our attachment to who we think we are. When our sense of worth depends entirely on external recognition, achievements, or roles, we live in constant anxiety about maintaining and defending these identities. Zen practice invites us to periodically remove our armor and discover who we are underneath our roles and achievements. In meditation, we sit without titles, without status, without the elaborate story of our lives. We return to simple presence, breathing, aware, alive. This isn't about rejecting our responsibilities or achievements, but about not being imprisoned by them. Master Eckhart taught, the most powerful prayer, one well-nigh omnipotent, consists of only 2 words: thank you. When we can appreciate our roles and achievements without being defined by them, we discover tremendous freedom. We can be a general when leadership is needed, a student when learning is required, a parent when nurturing is called for, without any of these temporary roles becoming our permanent identity. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, what armor might you consciously set aside? What roles, expectations, or identities can you temporarily release? Can you discover the simple awareness that exists before you put on tomorrow's costumes and titles? Perhaps you'll find, like the general, that you are far lighter and freer than you've been carrying yourself to be. As the Buddha said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. This love begins with accepting yourself beyond all the roles you play, all the achievements you've accumulated, and all the ways you've learned to present yourself to the world. Let us continue on our journey with a tale about perfection and purpose. This is the unraked garden. In the mountains of ancient Japan, a young monk named Jin had been entrusted with one of the temple's most sacred responsibilities, tending the famous rock garden that drew visitors from across the province. This wasn't merely a gardening task, but a spiritual practice, an opportunity to cultivate mindfulness through the meditative art of creating beauty. Every morning before the first hint of dawn, Jin would rise in silence and make his way to the garden with his wooden rake. The white gravel stretched before him like a canvas of infinite possibility. With meticulous care and deep concentration, he would spend hours creating perfect flowing patterns that resembled ocean waves frozen in stone. Each line had to be precisely spaced, each curve flowing seamlessly into the next. Not a single piece of gravel could be out of place. Not one line could show hesitation or imperfection. The garden became Jin's masterpiece. Monks would pause in their daily routines to admire his artistry. Visitors would stand at the garden's edge in silent appreciation, some weeping at the profound beauty of the perfectly ordered landscape. Jin felt deep pride in his work, knowing that his technical skill and dedication had created something worthy of reverence. One warm afternoon, as Jin stepped back to admire his latest creation, perhaps his finest work yet, he noticed the headmaster approaching. His heart swelled with anticipation. Surely Master Tanaka would offer words of praise for this flawless expression of devotion and skill. The master stood silently for a long time at the garden's edge, his weathered hands folded within his sleeves, his eyes taking in every perfect line and curve. Jin waited nearby, barely breathing, certain that recognition for his spiritual artistry was about to come. Without warning, without explanation, without even a glance at Jin, Master Tanaka stepped deliberately over the low boundary that separated the viewing area from the sacred garden. He walked slowly to the very center of the perfectly raked space and sat down cross-legged in meditation posture, his brown robe spreading across the white gravel, completely obliterating hours of meticulous work. Jin gasped audibly, his hands flying to his face in horror. "Master!" he cried out, unable to contain his shock. "You have destroyed it. Hours of work, ruined. The perfect patterns, gone." Master Tanaka opened his eyes and looked up at his student with infinite gentleness and the hint of a smile. "No, Jin," he said softly. "I have not destroyed anything. Before, what you created was a picture to be admired from a distance, a museum piece to impress observers. Now, it has become what it was always meant to be, a garden to be lived in, a space for practice, a place for awakening. You made it perfect for the eyes, but you forgot its true purpose. I have simply completed your work. As the Buddha observed, nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming." What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the difference between perfection and purpose, between creating something to be admired and creating something to serve life. Why do we become so attached to our perfectly arranged lives that we forget their actual purpose? Buddhism explains that our minds naturally cling to outcomes, especially beautiful or impressive ones. We can become so focused on creating the perfect appearance, whether in our homes, our relationships, our careers, or our spiritual practice, that we lose sight of what these areas of life are meant to serve. Jin's garden represents all the ways we create beautiful surfaces while missing deeper purpose. Consider the parent so focused on their child's perfect academic record that they miss opportunities for genuine connection. The spouse so concerned with maintaining the appearance of a perfect marriage that they avoid the messy work of real intimacy. The spiritual practitioner so attached to looking enlightened that they resist the vulnerable honesty required for actual growth. This attachment to pristine appearances creates a peculiar paralysis. We become curators of our own lives, carefully maintaining impressive displays while being afraid to actually live in them. Like Jin's garden, these perfect arrangements become untouchable, observed from a distance rather than fully inhabited. Zen master Dogen taught, "Time is not separate from you, and as you are present, time does not go away." The garden's true purpose wasn't to demonstrate Jin's skill or impress visitors. It was to provide a space for present moment awareness, for meditation, for the messy, imperfect, beautiful work of spiritual practice. Look deeply at your own pristine arrangements. What aspects of your life have become too perfect to actually use? Perhaps it's the beautifully decorated living room where no one feels comfortable sitting, the carefully planned schedule that leaves no room for spontaneity, the flawless public image that prevents authentic relationships, or the spiritual practice so focused on appearing advanced that it avoids beginner's mind. The master's disruption wasn't destructive, it was liberating. By sitting in the garden, he transformed it from a performance into a practice, from something to be preserved into something to be experienced. His robes spreading across the perfect lines created a new kind of beauty, the beauty of purpose fulfilled, of space actually inhabited, of perfection surrendered for the sake of presence. This story challenges our deepest assumptions about value and beauty. We're conditioned to believe that maintaining perfect appearances is spiritual practice, when often the opposite is true. Real spiritual growth happens in the disrupted garden, in the messy middle of actual living, in the courage to inhabit our lives fully rather than simply curating them carefully. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." The peace Jin was seeking through external perfection was always available in the simple act of presence, whether the garden was perfectly raked or beautifully disrupted. True meditation doesn't require perfect conditions. It transforms whatever conditions arise into opportunities for awakening. Tonight, as you look around your own perfectly arranged spaces, can you find the courage to actually live in them? What beautiful display might you be willing to disturb for the sake of genuine experience? Perhaps you'll discover, like Jin, that the most profound beauty emerges not from untouchable perfection, but from the willingness to sit down fully in the middle of your life. As the Buddha taught, better it is to live one day seeing the rise and fall of things than to live 100 years without ever seeing the rise and fall of things. The garden's lines will be raked again tomorrow, but this moment's opportunity for presence is irreplaceable. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about the source of our experience. This is the echo and the silence. A young boy lived with his grandmother in a small village, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering mountains. The child was naturally curious and loved to explore the world around him, discovering new wonders in the forests, streams, and rocky cliffs that formed his playground. One day, while wandering near the edge of a deep canyon that cut through the mountains, he made an exciting discovery. When he called out "hello" into the vast space, his voice came bouncing back to him from the canyon walls. "Hello!" Delighted by this magical phenomenon, he began experimenting with different sounds. "You are wonderful," he shouted, and the echo replied warmly, "You are wonderful." The boy clapped his hands and laughed as the sound returned to him multiplied and rich. For days, the boy returned to his special place to play with his echo friend. He would share jokes, sing songs, and tell stories, always receiving his own voice back, as if the canyon itself was talking to him. The echo became his constant companion, always agreeing with him, always responding with exactly what he wanted to hear. One afternoon, however, the boy arrived at the canyon feeling upset. Another child in the village had pushed him during play, and angry feelings burned in his chest. Instead of his usual cheerful greetings, he screamed into the canyon, "I hate you!" To his shock and terror, the echo screamed back, just as fiercely, "I hate you!" The boy's anger instantly transformed into fear. His echo friend had never spoken to him this way before. Confused and frightened, he ran home to his grandmother, tears streaming down his face. "Grandmother," he cried, "there's a mean person living in the canyon who hates me. He said terrible things to me." His wise grandmother listened carefully to his story, her weathered hands gently stroking his hair as he sobbed. When he finished, she took his hand. "Come," she said softly, "let me show you something." She led him back to the edge of the canyon, where the boy hung back nervously, afraid of encountering the angry voice again. But his grandmother simply stood at the cliff's edge in perfect silence. The wind moved through the trees. A bird called in the distance, but from the canyon came only peaceful quiet. After several minutes of this deep silence, she turned to her grandson. "Tell me, what did you hear?" "Nothing, grandmother," the boy whispered. "Just quiet." She nodded with infinite gentleness. "Exactly, my dear one. You see, you have been listening to the echo of your own voice and believing it was someone else speaking. When you called out with joy, joy returned to you. When you called out with anger, anger returned to you. But the canyon itself is neither joyful nor angry. It simply gives back what you offer it." She knelt down to meet his eyes. "The world is like this canyon, dear child. It reflects back to us what we send into it. When we approach life with kindness, we often find kindness reflected back. When we approach with anger or fear, these feelings echo back to us as well. But true peace doesn't come from trying to control what the world echoes back to us. It comes from understanding the silence that exists before we speak at all. The Buddha once said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." The deeper teaching here shows us how completely we create our own experience through the quality of consciousness we bring to each moment. Why do we so often believe that our emotional reactions originate outside ourselves? Buddhism reveals that we live in a world of constant echoes, mistaking the reflection of our own mental states for objective reality. When we approach a situation with anxiety, we see threat everywhere. When we interact with others while feeling defensive, we perceive attack in neutral comments. When we move through our day expecting disappointment, we find evidence for our expectations at every turn. This echo effect operates at the subtlest levels of our experience. The hurried person encounters delays everywhere. The irritated driver seems to attract inconsiderate traffic. The lonely individual notices every instance of social rejection while missing opportunities for connection. Like the boy in the canyon, we often fail to recognize that we're hearing our own voice reflected back to us. Consider how this pattern manifests in your relationships. When you approach your partner with criticism, how do they typically respond? When you interact with your children from a place of stress and hurry, what energy do they reflect back? When you engage colleagues with suspicion or judgment, what kind of responses do you receive? The canyon of relationship is constantly echoing back the quality of consciousness we bring to it. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending that external circumstances don't matter. Real difficulties exist, genuine challenges arise, and other people certainly have their own patterns and reactions. But Zen practice reveals that our inner state profoundly influences how we perceive and respond to these external conditions, which in turn shapes how they respond to us. Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion." This wisdom points to the echo principle. The quality we emanate tends to be reflected back to us. But more importantly, the very act of emanating compassion transforms our own experience regardless of what returns. The grandmother's teaching about silence points to something even deeper than managing our echoes. In meditation, we discover the awareness that exists before thoughts, emotions, or reactions arise. This primordial silence is not the absence of experience, but the spacious presence in which all experience occurs. From this place of inner stillness, we can respond to life rather than merely echoing back its apparent provocations. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." When we speak, and act from the silence of centered awareness rather than the noise of reactive emotion, our words carry a different quality entirely. They come not from our conditioning, but from our clarity, not from our fears, but from our wisdom. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, can you notice the echoes you've been creating and receiving throughout your day? Before tomorrow's first interaction, can you find a moment of silence? Not to plan what to say or how to respond, but simply to touch the quiet awareness from which authentic response can emerge. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The canyon will always echo back what we call into it, but in the silence before we speak, we discover the source of all our echoes and the freedom to choose what we send into the world. Our next story reveals the subtle poison of habitual negativity and the freedom found in contentment. This is the lesson of the monastery and the monk who never stopped complaining. In a remote mountain monastery known for its strict discipline and profound silence, a community of monks devoted themselves to deep spiritual practice. The monastery followed an ancient vow of silence, understanding that constant talking often distracts the mind from inner contemplation and genuine insight. For years at a time, the monks would practice in complete quiet, finding peace in the absence of unnecessary words. However, this particular monastery had one unusual tradition. Every 10 years, each monk was permitted to speak exactly 2 words to the head monk. This brief allowance acknowledged that sometimes practical concerns or spiritual insights might need to be communicated, while still maintaining the essential discipline of silence that supported their contemplative practice. One young monk entered this monastery with sincere intentions and dedicated himself to the demanding schedule of meditation, work, and study. But from the very beginning, he struggled with dissatisfaction. The simple accommodations felt uncomfortable, the plain food seemed inadequate, and the rigorous schedule challenged his preferences at every turn. After his first 10 years of practice, he went to the head monk for his permitted communication. The elder looked at him with kind, expectant eyes, ready to hear whatever wisdom or insight the decade of silent practice might have produced. "Bed hard," the monk said, using his 2 precious words to express his primary complaint about the sleeping arrangements. "I see," the head monk replied gently, making note of the comment, but offering no judgment or solution. The monk returned to his silent practice, but his dissatisfaction only seemed to deepen over the next decade. Instead of using the years to cultivate acceptance and inner peace, he spent his time dwelling on various discomforts and inadequacies he perceived in the monastery's provisions. His meditation became increasingly agitated as his mind rehearsed complaints he couldn't voice. When his second opportunity to speak arrived after another 10 years, he again approached the head monk. The elder greeted him with the same patient attention, curious to see how 2 more decades of practice might have influenced the monk's perspective. "Food stinks," the monk declared, using his allocated words to express his ongoing dissatisfaction with the simple vegetarian meals provided by the community. "I see," the head monk responded with unchanged equanimity, observing this second expression of complaint without surprise or criticism. Another 10 years passed, during which the monk's internal negativity continued to grow. Instead of finding freedom through spiritual practice, he had used 3 decades to perfect the art of mental complaining. His silent years were filled not with peace and insight, but with constant internal criticism of his circumstances. When his third opportunity for speech arrived, the monk appeared before the head monk with obvious agitation. 3 decades of accumulated dissatisfaction had finally reached its breaking point. "I quit," he announced emphatically, using his 2 words to express his ultimate decision to abandon the path he had never truly embraced. The head monk looked at him with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Well, I can see why," he replied compassionately. "All you've ever done is complain." The Buddha taught, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. This teaching reveals how the monk's 30 years of practice had actually reinforced the very patterns that caused his suffering rather than dissolving them. Why do we sometimes use spiritual practice to perfect our dissatisfaction rather than transcend it? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to bring our habitual mental patterns into any environment, then blame external circumstances for our internal states. The monk never truly engaged with the practice. He simply endured it while maintaining his resistance. The monastery's conditions weren't the source of the monk's suffering. His attitude toward those conditions was. Countless other monks had found peace, insight, and profound contentment in the exact same circumstances. The difference lay not in what they experienced, but in how they related to their experience. Consider your own patterns of complaint and dissatisfaction. How much of your mental energy goes toward rehearsing grievances about circumstances you cannot change? The monk spent 30 years of precious life focused on bed hardness and food quality, instead of using those same years to develop inner freedom. This story also reveals the cumulative power of our mental habits. Each day, the monk chose complaint over acceptance. He strengthened neural pathways of dissatisfaction. Over 3 decades, these patterns became so ingrained that leaving seemed like the only option, when in reality, changing his perspective had always been available. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The monk's tragedy was his failure to recognize that his dissatisfaction was impermanent and changeable. Instead of working with his resistance, he fed it daily for 30 years until it consumed his entire spiritual journey. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The monk's 6 words over 30 years, all complaints, brought no peace to himself or others. Meanwhile, monks who used their practice to cultivate gratitude and acceptance found profound tranquility in the same conditions. Look deeply at your own relationship with current challenges. Where are you spending years complaining about circumstances that could be transformed through a shift in perspective? What would change if you used the same mental energy currently devoted to dissatisfaction to cultivate acceptance and inner peace? Tonight, as you notice the inevitable discomforts and imperfections of daily life, can you remember the monk's wasted decades? Can you choose gratitude over complaint, acceptance over resistance, understanding that your response to circumstances shapes your experience far more than the circumstances themselves? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The monastery offered every monk the same opportunity for peace and awakening. Some found it, others did not. Not because of external conditions, but because of the quality of attention they brought to those conditions. In every moment, we face the same choice the monk faced daily: to practice complaining or to practice contentment. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of seeking and finding. This is the master sculptor's discovery. In a bustling stone quarry beneath towering mountains, a master sculptor moved among the marble blocks with the practiced eye of one who had spent decades coaxing beauty from stone. The morning sun cast golden light across the quarry, illuminating countless blocks that seemed to whisper their stories to him. "Aha," he would say, running his weathered hands across smooth surfaces. "There is a heroic figure locked in that piece, and a saint trapped inside that other one." His reputation had grown precisely because of this gift, his ability to sense what he called the suchness of every stone, to see beyond raw material to its true nature waiting to be released. But on this morning, the sculptor's heart carried a different weight. For over 40 years, he had been searching for something special, the perfect block from which he could create his masterwork, a glorious statue of the Buddha. His energies were waning now, and still this elusive Buddha block remained hidden from him. He had traveled to great quarries around the world, consulted experts, hired specialists to scour remote areas, yet nowhere could he find that one perfect slab that would allow him to release the most perfect likeness of Buddha. Feeling the weight of his lifelong quest, the sculptor sought consolation from a local Zen priest who headed a small temple at the end of his street. The temple was modest, with a peaceful courtyard where a stone well sat, surrounded by carefully tended moss. "Master," the sculptor said, bowing deeply, "I have searched for 40 years for the perfect stone from which to carve the Buddha. My life's work remains incomplete." The priest listened with kind eyes, then smiled gently. "No problem," he said with such simplicity that the sculptor felt both confused and hopeful. "Do you mean you can tell me where I might find the perfect material from which I can release the Buddha of my dreams?" the sculptor asked, excitement rising in his voice. "Of course." "Where?" The priest raised his hand and pointed across the courtyard. "Over there," he said, indicating the stone well. The excited sculptor hurried to the well and peered down into the still, dark water. There, looking back at him with the same questioning eyes, the same lined face marked by years of searching, was his own reflection. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you cannot find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it? The deeper teaching here shows us that what we seek most desperately often lies not in some distant place or perfect circumstance, but in the very ground of our own being. Why do we exhaust ourselves searching everywhere except within? Zen Buddhism reveals that we become so focused on the object of our search that we forget to examine the searcher. The sculptor had examined thousands of stones, traveled countless miles, yet never considered that the very consciousness doing the seeking was itself the perfect material for awakening. Consider how often throughout your day you postpone contentment, waiting for better circumstances. "I'll be happy when I get the promotion, find the right partner, when conditions are finally perfect." This is seeking the Buddha block everywhere, except in the reflection looking back at us right now. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." The sculptor's profound realization wasn't that he needed to become something different, but that he needed to recognize what he already was. The perfect material for expressing Buddha nature isn't found in external circumstances, but in the awareness that recognizes, seeks, and creates. The well represents the still point within consciousness, where seeking ends and finding begins. When we stop looking outward and peer into the depths of our own awareness, we discover that the one who seeks and the sought are the same. In Zen practice, we speak of original face, the essential nature that exists before conditioning. This original face isn't hidden in some special place. It's looking back at us from every mirror, every moment of genuine presence. Tonight, as you encounter the reflection of your own seeking mind, can you recognize the Buddha nature that has been with you all along? Perhaps it appears in your capacity for wonder, your longing for truth, or simply in the awareness that notices these very words. As the Buddha taught, look within, you are the Buddha. The masterwork you've been seeking isn't waiting for perfect materials. It's waiting for the recognition that the artist, the art, and the awareness that appreciates beauty are all expressions of the same essential nature. Let us continue on our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism with a story about the phantoms we create with our own minds. This is the tale of the haunting that was no haunting at all. A man lived peacefully with his beloved wife for many years, their love deep and genuine, their companionship a source of daily joy. But as fate would have it, she became gravely ill. As she lay on her deathbed, her breathing shallow and her strength fading, she grasped her husband's hand with surprising force. "My darling," she whispered, her eyes filled with both love and fear. "I cannot bear the thought of leaving you, and I cannot bear the thought of you loving another. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not see any other women. Promise me you will remain faithful to my memory forever, or I swear I will return from the grave to haunt you." The husband, his heart breaking at her words and her impending departure, made the promise she demanded. What else could he do? In that moment of grief and love, he would have agreed to anything to ease her suffering and honor their bond. For several months after her death, the widower kept his word. He avoided social gatherings, declined invitations, and turned away from any possibility of female companionship. His world became small and lonely, filled only with work and memories. But as time passed, and the sharpest edge of grief began to soften, he found himself drawn back into the world of the living. It was at a local market that he met her, a kind woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Despite his promise to his deceased wife, he found himself drawn to this new person. Conversations led to friendship. Friendship deepened into affection. And eventually, despite his guilt and internal conflict, he fell in love again. The night he and his new love became engaged, his worst fears materialized. As he lay in bed, the room suddenly grew cold, and there before him stood the unmistakable figure of his dead wife. Her face was pale with anger, her eyes blazing with accusation. "You have broken your promise to me," she said, her voice carrying the chill of the grave. "You have betrayed our love and dishonored my memory." But what truly terrified the man was not just her appearance. It was her impossible knowledge. Night after night, she would return to torment him, recounting in perfect detail everything that had transpired between him and his fiancée. She would repeat their conversations word for word, describe their private moments, reveal their most intimate exchanges. Nothing remained hidden from this ghostly presence. The haunting became so intense that the man could no longer sleep. Dark circles formed under his eyes, his hands shook constantly, and his new relationship began to suffer under the weight of his terror and exhaustion. Desperate for relief, he sought out a Zen master who lived in a small temple near the village. "Master," the man said, his voice trembling as he recounted his story, "my dead wife's ghost appears to me every night. She knows everything I do, everything I say. She repeats our conversations exactly as they happened. I am being driven to madness." The old master listened carefully, stroking his beard thoughtfully. When the man finished his account, The master smiled knowingly. "This is indeed a very clever ghost," he said. "You should admire such supernatural wisdom. But I will tell you exactly what to do when she appears tonight." That evening, as the room grew cold and the familiar figure materialized, the man followed the master's instructions precisely. "You are truly a wise and all-knowing spirit," he said to the ghost. "You see everything I do and know everything I think. Since you possess such incredible powers and I can hide nothing from you, surely you can answer one simple question for me." "Ask your question," the ghost replied coldly. The man reached down to a large bag of beans that sat near his bedside table. He scooped up a handful and held his closed fist toward the apparition. "Tell me exactly how many beans I am holding in my hand right now." The ghost opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her form began to waver, becoming translucent around the edges. For the first time since her appearances began, she looked uncertain, even confused. I cannot," she stammered, and then, like morning mist touched by sunlight, she simply vanished. The ghost never returned again, and the man was finally free to live his life in peace. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully our minds can create seemingly real experiences from nothing but guilt, fear, and unresolved emotions. Why do we give such power to the ghosts of our own making? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from external forces, but from the phantoms we create through our own psychological patterns. The ghost in this story was nothing more than the man's own guilt and conditioning, projected outward and given form by his tormented mind. Consider how often in your own life you are haunted by voices that seem to know your every move, that judge your every decision, that remind you of promises you've broken or standards you've failed to meet. These internalized critics often speak with the voices of people from our past, parents, teachers, former partners, but their power comes entirely from our own minds giving them substance. The man's ghost could recite his conversations perfectly because it was his own memory playing them back to him. It knew his private moments because it was created by his own consciousness. It appeared when his guilt was strongest because guilt was its very substance. The ghost was real in its effects, but had no independent existence. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between what is actually present and what our minds are adding to the situation. The man was genuinely in love with a new person, but his conditioning told him this was a betrayal. His deceased wife was genuinely gone, but his unprocessed grief and guilt kept her psychologically present. The master's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. By asking the ghost to know something that existed only in the present moment, something the man's own mind couldn't possibly know, he revealed the phantom's true nature. The beans in his hand were unknown even to him until he counted them. No amount of memory, guilt, or psychological projection could provide this information. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "Our thoughts are just thoughts. They're not necessarily true, they're not necessarily important, and they're not necessarily ours." The ghost's accusations felt absolutely real to the man, but they were simply thoughts and emotions given form by his own mental processes. Look deeply at your own experience. What ghosts do you carry that speak with impossible authority about your worth, your choices, your future? Often these voices claim to know things they cannot possibly know, what others really think of you, what will happen if you take risks, whether you deserve happiness or love. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything, what you think you become. When we understand that we are constantly creating our experience through the stories we tell ourselves, we begin to see that we also have the power to question these stories, to test their validity, to challenge their authority over our lives. Tonight, as you notice the familiar voices of self-doubt, guilt, or fear arising in your mind, can you remember the man and his handful of beans? Can you find the courage to ask these internal critics to prove their supernatural knowledge by answering questions they cannot possibly answer? Can you recognize that the very thoughts that seem to know everything about you actually know far less than they claim? As the Buddha observed, doubt everything, find your own light. The ghosts that haunt us lose their power the moment we stop feeding them with our belief, the moment we see them for what they truly are, not supernatural visitations, but creations of our own minds that can be dissolved as easily as they were formed. Let us continue on our journey with a story about the intensity required for genuine spiritual awakening. This is the tale of the drowning lesson. Beside a crystal-clear mountain river, where water flowed over smooth stones with the endless song of moving current, a hermit had established his practice. For years, he had lived in solitude, finding in the rhythm of flowing water and changing seasons a perfect mirror for the movements of his own consciousness. One morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the canopy and the air carried the fresh scent of mountain laurel, a young man approached the hermit's simple dwelling. The seeker had traveled far, his clothing dusty from the journey, his face earnest with spiritual longing. "Master," the young man said, bowing respectfully, "I wish to become your disciple." The hermit looked up from his contemplation, studying the newcomer with eyes that had grown accustomed to reading the subtle signs of genuine versus superficial spiritual interest. "Why?" the hermit replied simply. The young man paused, considering his answer carefully. "Because I want to find God," he said finally, believing this to be the most noble response. What happened next took the seeker completely by surprise. Without warning, the hermit sprang to his feet, grabbed the young man by the scruff of his neck, and dragged him toward the river. Before the stunned visitor could protest, he found himself being pushed into the clear, cold water. The hermit's strong hands forced the young man's head beneath the surface and held him there. Panic set in immediately. The seeker's lungs began to burn as his oxygen depleted. He kicked and struggled with increasing desperation, his arms flailing as he fought to break free. Every second felt like an eternity as his body screamed for air. Nothing existed except the urgent, overwhelming need to breathe. After what seemed like a lifetime but was probably only a minute, the hermit finally pulled the gasping young man up out of the water. The seeker coughed violently, water streaming from his nose and mouth as he struggled to fill his lungs with precious air. His entire body shook from cold, shock, and the aftermath of near drowning. When his breathing finally normalized, the hermit spoke again, his voice carrying a different quality, still gentle, but charged with unmistakable intensity. "Tell me," he said, watching the young man's face carefully, "what did you want most of all when you were underwater?" The answer came without hesitation, raw and honest. "Air." The hermit nodded slowly, satisfied that his lesson had found its mark. "Very well," he said. "Go home and come back to me when you want God as much as you just wanted air." Without another word, the hermit turned and walked back to his place of meditation, leaving the dripping, shaken young man to contemplate the profound teaching he had just received. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Yet this wisdom must be ignited by genuine spiritual fire, not merely intellectual interest. The hermit's dramatic teaching illuminates the difference between casual spiritual curiosity and the total commitment that authentic awakening requires. What emerges from this story is recognition that spiritual seeking demands the same intensity and urgency we naturally bring to physical survival. The young seeker thought he wanted God, but his desire was still within the realm of preference rather than necessity. He wanted spiritual awakening as an addition to life rather than as life itself. Why do we approach spiritual development with tentative commitment? First is our attachment to comfort and the familiar. Genuine transformation requires letting go of who we think we are, which the ego experiences as death. Second is our misunderstanding of what spiritual seeking entails. Popular culture presents awakening as a pleasant expansion, but traditional teachings describe it as a dismantling of illusion. Third is our tendency to compartmentalize spirituality as one area among others, rather than a complete reorientation of our relationship to existence. Consider how this plays out in contemporary seeking. We collect techniques like trophies, jumping from meditation retreats to healing workshops to consciousness conferences, accumulating experiences without allowing any single practice to fundamentally transform us. We want the insurance policy of spiritual development without paying the premium of total dedication. The drowning experience represents what mystics call the dark night of the soul, moments when our usual sources of identity and security are stripped away. In such moments, we discover what we truly value most deeply. This is the quality of desire that spiritual awakening requires. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck wrote, "Practice is not about achieving some special state. Practice is about being willing to die to who you think you are." The hermit's lesson brought the young seeker face to face with this death-like quality of authentic spiritual work. This intensity doesn't mean spiritual practice should be grim. Rather, it means bringing the same passionate engagement to inner development that we naturally bring to whatever we value most deeply. A musician practicing for Carnegie Hall, a scientist pursuing a breakthrough, all demonstrate the focused dedication that spiritual awakening requires. The river represents the flow of ordinary consciousness, where we spend most of our time skimming along the surface. Being pushed underwater symbolizes the necessity of going deeper into the unconscious patterns that actually govern our lives. This depth work requires the same survival level intensity the seeker experienced when deprived of air. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual aspirations, can you honestly assess the quality of your desire? Is your seeking driven by curiosity and preference, or by necessity? What would it mean to want truth as much as you want your next breath? As the Buddha taught, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. The path to awakening lies not in accumulating more spiritual experiences, but in bringing the totality of our being to whatever practice we choose. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a remote mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with tremendous intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholarly precision, memorizing sutras and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often remarked on his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist philosophy. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into paradox the moment he thought he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's quarters. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Venerable master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have encountered a teaching that I cannot comprehend. Could you please illuminate its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful precision, explaining his confusion and the various interpretations he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally erupted into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with mirth, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely bewildered. This was not the response he had anticipated. Where he expected profound wisdom and careful explanation, he found only laughter. The master's amusement seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing distress. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's inexplicable laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals, his meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual inquiry been met with such puzzling amusement? Other monks noticed his distressed state, but his responses to their concerns were vague and troubled. He felt humiliated, confused, and increasingly agitated. Had the master been mocking his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the torment any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time, he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. "Master, for 3 days I have been deeply disturbed by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. "Monk, do you know what your problem is?" the master asked kindly. "Your problem is that you are worse than a clown." The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. "Venerable sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have sacrificed worldly pleasures and pursued wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer?" The master smiled warmly and explained, A clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel disturbed, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown? At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mockery. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma expressing itself through paradox. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh. First quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful absurdity of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others reveal the state of our own minds. Why do we become disturbed when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's disturbance stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our identification with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the spontaneity and openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be transmitted. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, solemn explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways. A master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need, but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider frivolous. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our preconceptions? The master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." The master's laughter was not diminishing the Dharma, but celebrating its inexhaustible joy, a joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. Let us now explore a story about acceptance, natural cycles, and what true prosperity means. This is the teaching of the rich man and the master's blessing. A wealthy merchant had built a vast fortune through years of shrewd business dealings and careful investments. His family owned multiple properties, controlled trade routes, and wielded considerable influence throughout the region. As he aged, the merchant became increasingly concerned about ensuring his family's continued prosperity long after his death. Having heard of a renowned Zen master whose wisdom was said to transcend ordinary understanding, the merchant decided to commission something special. He approached the master with a request that seemed both generous and practical. "Master," he said, bowing respectfully while displaying his finest robes and jewelry, "I would like to commission you to write something profound that will encourage the prosperity of my family for generations to come, something that my descendants can treasure and draw inspiration from long after I am gone. Money is no object. I simply want the most powerful blessing you can provide." The master listened quietly to this request, observing the merchant's obvious wealth and the sincere concern he felt for his family's future. After a moment of contemplation, he nodded his agreement and asked for a large piece of the finest paper. The merchant watched eagerly as the master prepared his brush and ink with ceremonial care. He expected elaborate calligraphy, perhaps ancient wisdom about accumulating wealth, or powerful mantras that would ensure his family's continued success in business and life. The master's reputation suggested that whatever he wrote would be both beautiful and profound. With simple, elegant strokes, the master wrote just 7 words. Father dies, son dies, grandson dies. When the merchant read what had been written, his face flushed red with anger and disbelief. This was not at all what he had expected or requested. "Master!" he exclaimed, his voice rising with indignation. "I asked you to write something that would bring happiness and prosperity to my family for generations. Instead, you give me this depressing message about death. Why do you give me something so depressing like this?" The master looked at him with calm, compassionate eyes and began to explain the deeper meaning behind what might appear to be a morbid prediction. "Consider carefully what I have written," the master said gently. "If your son should die before you, this would bring unbearable grief to your family. Parents are not meant to outlive their children. Such loss creates a wound that never fully heals. If your grandson should die before your son, this too would bring tremendous sorrow to your family and disrupt the natural flow of life." The merchant began to listen more carefully, sensing there was something deeper in the master's words than he had initially understood. "But if your family continues, generation after generation, with each death occurring in the natural order I have described, this represents the ideal course of life. This is the pattern that brings the least suffering and the greatest harmony. This natural succession, where each generation has time to live fully before passing responsibility to the next, is true happiness and genuine prosperity." As the Buddha taught, of all things, impermanence is the most sacred. This ancient wisdom illuminates why accepting the natural order of life and death creates more genuine peace than any accumulation of material wealth ever could. Why do we resist the fundamental reality that all things, including our own lives, and those of our loved ones are temporary. Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from fighting against impermanence rather than finding peace within its natural rhythms. The merchant's initial understanding of prosperity was limited to material accumulation, wealth, property, and influence that could be passed down through generations. But the master pointed to a deeper form of prosperity, the blessing of a family that experiences life and death in harmony with natural order rather than in tragic disruption of it. Consider how different our relationship to mortality becomes when we see death not as failure or tragedy, but as the natural conclusion of a life fully lived. The Master's blessing wasn't morbid. It was recognition that the greatest gift we can wish for our families is that each generation has the opportunity to live completely before making way for the next. This teaching also reveals the limitation of trying to control the future through accumulation of resources. The merchant wanted to ensure his family's prosperity through external means, but the master suggested that true prosperity comes from accepting life's fundamental conditions rather than attempting to transcend them. In our modern context, we often measure family success by material legacy, the wealth we leave behind, the properties we pass down, the financial security we provide. But how often do we consider the emotional and spiritual legacy of a family that understands and accepts life's natural rhythms? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching reminds us that even while we work diligently to create good conditions for ourselves and our loved ones, the ultimate prosperity comes from understanding and accepting the temporary nature of all achievements. Look deeply at your own hopes and fears for your family's future. How much energy goes toward trying to control outcomes that are ultimately beyond our control? What would it mean to wish for your loved ones not immunity from life's natural processes, but wisdom and acceptance in meeting them? The Master's blessing contains a profound recognition. The alternative to natural order is not preservation, but tragedy. By wishing for the normal sequence of generational transition, he was wishing for the absence of the premature deaths and disrupted cycles that create the deepest forms of suffering. Tonight, as you consider what you most hope for your family and loved ones, can you remember the Master's wisdom? Can you see that the greatest blessing might not be the avoidance of mortality, but the grace to experience it in harmony with natural order? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The Master's 7 words brought the merchant face to face with the ultimate reality that no amount of wealth can change: our participation in the endless cycle of birth, life, and death that characterizes all existence. True prosperity lies not in escaping this cycle, but in dancing gracefully within it. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom, each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown." Safety lies in staying exactly where you are. But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, he found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool!" they cried. "Let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle!" they called out. "A creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all." The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. "I am no more Messiah than any of you," he called back. "The river delights in lifting us all free, if only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage, this grand adventure of trust and flow." But the creatures only cried louder, "Savior, Savior!" Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous Savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change." Water doesn't fight the mountainside. It finds the natural pathway down. When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax right now and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between submission and genuine understanding. This is the lesson of the proud priest and the gentle master. Master Bankei had gained quite a reputation throughout the region. Unlike other teachers who filled their talks with complex philosophical arguments and lengthy quotations from ancient texts, Bankei spoke directly from his heart to the hearts of his listeners. His words were simple but profound, accessible to farmers and scholars alike. People from all walks of life, merchants, servants, samurai, and monks, gathered to hear him speak about the natural peace that exists within every person. The master's growing popularity began to trouble a priest from the Nichiren sect, whose own temple had grown noticeably emptier as his followers left to hear about Zen. This priest had built his identity around being learned, respected, and obeyed. He prided himself on his knowledge of scriptures and his ability to win theological debates. The idea that a simple Zen teacher could attract his devoted followers with plain speaking felt like a personal insult. Determined to expose what he assumed must be shallow teaching disguised as wisdom, the Nichiren priest stormed into one of Bankei's gatherings. He pushed through the crowd of seated listeners, his robes billowing dramatically, his face stern with righteous indignation. The peaceful atmosphere of quiet attention was suddenly charged with tension as people turned to see what was happening. "Hey, Zen teacher!" the priest called out loudly, his voice echoing through the hall. The deliberate rudeness of his address was unmistakable. He was treating the revered master like a common street performer. "Wait just a minute. I have something to say to you." Bankei looked up calmly from where he sat, showing no sign of irritation or defensiveness at the interruption. His eyes held the same gentle attention he gave to every person who approached him, whether they came with genuine questions or hostile challenges. "All these people here respect you and will obey whatever you say," the priest continued, his voice growing louder as he warmed to his challenge. "But a man like myself does not respect you at all. Can you make me obey you? Can your so-called wisdom compel someone who sees through your simple tricks?" The crowd held its breath, expecting either an angry response or a learned rebuttal that would put this arrogant challenger in his place. Instead, Bankei smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth and curiosity. "Please come up beside me," the master said gently, "and I will show you." The priest, feeling triumphant, that he had provoked a response, and confident in his ability to expose whatever manipulation was about to unfold, proudly pushed his way through the crowd to the front of the hall. He stood beside the master's simple cushion, his chest puffed out with self-importance, ready to demonstrate his independence from this supposed authority. "Thank you," Bankei said with the same gentle smile. "Now we might hear each other better if you come over to my left side. Please step over here." Without thinking, the priest moved to Bankai's left side. It seemed like a reasonable request after all. "Actually," Bankei continued thoughtfully, "perhaps we could speak more clearly if you were on my right side instead. Would you mind stepping over there?" Again, the priest complied automatically. It was such a small, sensible adjustment that he didn't even notice he was following instructions. Bankei's smile deepened, his eyes twinkling with gentle amusement. "You see," he observed quietly, "you are already obeying me. And I think you are actually a very gentle, cooperative person. Now please sit down and listen to what I have to share." The priest stood frozen, suddenly realizing what had just happened. He had come to demonstrate his independence and superiority, but had instead revealed his natural willingness to respond cooperatively to kind, reasonable requests. His whole argument had dissolved not through force or clever rhetoric, but through his own unconscious behavior. The crowd remained silent, but many people were struggling not to smile. They had witnessed something remarkable, not a defeat or humiliation, but a gentle revelation. The master had shown that true influence comes not from demanding obedience, but from inviting natural cooperation. The priest felt his anger and arrogance melting away, replaced by something he hadn't expected: curiosity. How had this simple man accomplished what felt like magic? How had he transformed a hostile confrontation into a moment of mutual understanding without ever raising his voice or asserting his authority? Still somewhat dazed by the experience, the priest sat down. As Bankei began to speak again, the words seemed to bypass his analytical mind and speak directly to his heart. For the first time in years, he listened not to find flaws or prepare counter-arguments, but simply to hear what was being offered. Buddha's wisdom tells us, true obedience is not blind submission, but conscious harmony. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between the compliance that comes from fear or social pressure and the natural cooperation that arises from genuine understanding. Why do we so often confuse authority with authoritarianism, influence with coercion? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning around power. We assume that getting others to cooperate requires force, manipulation, or the assertion of superiority. But the deepest teaching here shows us that true leadership emerges from understanding human nature, not from overpowering it. The priest came expecting to encounter someone who would try to dominate him because that was the only model of authority he knew, when instead he met someone who simply invited his natural cooperativeness. His entire framework for understanding power and influence was gently challenged. Consider your own experiences with authority. The teachers, bosses, or leaders who most positively influenced your life. Did they command your respect through force, or did they earn it by appealing to your better nature? The difference is profound. Forced compliance creates resentment and resistance, while invited cooperation creates genuine change. In our daily relationships, we often fall into the same trap as the priest. We approach conflicts assuming we need to overpower others to get what we want. We prepare arguments, marshal our defenses, and ready ourselves for battle. But Bankai's approach suggests a different possibility. What if we assumed the best about others and invited their natural wisdom to emerge? Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "When another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself, and his suffering is spilling over." The priest's aggression came from his own insecurity and fear of being displaced. Bankai's genius lay in seeing past the hostile surface to the suffering underneath, then responding to the suffering rather than the aggression. This doesn't mean being passive or allowing ourselves to be mistreated. Bankai maintained clear boundaries and didn't submit to the priest's demands for a debate. Instead, he redirected the energy of the encounter towards something more constructive. He transformed a potential power struggle into a teaching moment. The Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. This principle applies not just to obvious hatred, but to all forms of resistance and conflict. When we meet resistance with resistance, we simply create more tension. When we meet resistance with understanding, we create space for transformation. Tonight, as you consider the relationships and situations in your life where you feel the need to assert your will or defend your position, can you remember the gentle master who never commanded obedience, yet received complete cooperation? Can you find ways to invite others' natural wisdom rather than trying to overpower their resistance? As the Buddha observed, in separateness lies the world's greatest misery. In compassion lies the world's true strength. True authority comes not from the power to make others obey, but from the wisdom to help them discover their own desire to cooperate in creating something beautiful together. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the most fundamental truth that surrounds us yet remains invisible. This is the tale of the fish and the ocean. In the vast depths of the Pacific, where sunlight filtered down through layers of blue and green, and coral gardens swayed in gentle currents, a young fish swam restlessly through familiar waters. Despite being surrounded by the wonder of ocean life, schools of silver fish moving like liquid metal, sea anemones dancing in the current, and the rhythmic pulse of waves far above, the young fish felt troubled by a persistent question. One day, approaching an ancient sea turtle whose shell bore the scars and wisdom of countless journeys, the young fish asked earnestly, "Elder, I keep hearing other sea creatures talk about something they call the ocean. They speak of it with such reverence, as if it's the most important thing in existence. But I've searched everywhere, and I cannot find this ocean anywhere. What exactly is this mysterious thing everyone talks about?" The old turtle's eyes, deep and patient like tidal pools, regarded the young fish with gentle amusement. "Little one," the turtle replied in a voice worn smooth by decades of storms and calms, "the ocean is this very thing that surrounds you on all sides at every moment." The young fish looked around frantically, darting left and right, swimming up toward the distant surface and down toward the sandy bottom. "But I don't see anything surrounding me. There's nothing here but water and fish and plants and rocks. Where is this ocean you speak of? Why can't I see it?" The turtle settled more comfortably on a bed of soft kelp, understanding that this was a teaching moment that required patience. "Of course you cannot see it, young friend," the turtle explained. "The ocean is both inside and outside of you. You were born in the ocean. You breathe the ocean. You are nourished by the ocean. And one day you will return to the ocean. The ocean flows through your gills and around your body just as naturally as your own scales cover your skin. It is so much a part of you that it has become invisible. The young fish paused, beginning to sense something vast and fundamental that had been present all along but remained unnamed. "You mean this water I swim through?" "Is the ocean, yes," the turtle confirmed. "You have never been separate from it, not for a single moment of your existence. As the Buddha observed, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with awareness." This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with the Tao, the fundamental flow of existence that permeates everything, yet remains largely unnoticed in our daily lives. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual blindness. Like the fish who cannot see the ocean, we live immersed in the sacred, but fail to recognize it because it is too close, too constant, too fundamental to our existence to register as separate from ourselves. Why do we struggle to perceive the Tao, this universal flow that sustains and surrounds us? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of seeking the extraordinary while overlooking the ordinary. We imagine that spiritual truth must be dramatic, mystical, or separate from everyday experience. We look for God in burning bushes while missing the divine presence in morning coffee, in the breath entering our lungs, in the simple fact of awareness itself. The Tao expresses itself in everything we encounter: the changing seasons, the cycles of sleep and waking, the rhythm of our heartbeat, the way thoughts arise and dissolve in consciousness. It is the organizing principle behind both the spiral of galaxies and the unfurling of fern leaves, the same pattern expressing itself at every scale of existence. Consider how often throughout your day you might glimpse this underlying flow without recognizing it. The way traffic naturally organizes itself, despite having no central controller. The way conversations find their own rhythm and timing. The way your body breathes without conscious direction. The way solutions to problems seem to emerge from somewhere beyond deliberate thinking. These are all expressions of the Tao working through apparent chaos to create spontaneous order. Zen teacher Alan Watts taught, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." The Tao is similar. It cannot be grasped or contained because we are expressions of it rather than separate observers of it. Every attempt to understand the Tao through conceptual thinking is like the fish trying to get outside the ocean to examine it objectively. This doesn't mean the Tao is merely a philosophical concept. It is the most practical and immediate reality. The intelligence that coordinates the trillions of cells in your body. The awareness in which all thoughts and sensations appear. The life force that animates everything from redwood trees to bacteria. In Chinese philosophy, the character for Tao literally means the way or the path. But this is not a path we walk towards some distant destination. It is the path that walks itself through us, the way reality unfolds moment by moment, without requiring our management or control. Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." Yet here we are, using words to point towards something beyond words. This is the beautiful paradox of spiritual teaching. We must use the limited to point toward the unlimited, knowing that the finger pointing at the moon is never the moon itself. Tonight, as you feel the breath moving in and out of your body without your conscious control, can you sense the Tao expressing itself through this simple miracle? Can you recognize in this automatic process the same intelligence that moves the planets and changes the seasons? The Buddha taught, "Look within, thou art the Buddha." You are not separate from the ocean of existence any more than a wave is separate from the sea. In recognizing this fundamental non-separation, we stop seeking the Tao and begin living as its conscious expression. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant warfare between rival clans, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his comrades fell around him and defeat became inevitable, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield, his armor stripped, his weapons confiscated. That evening, they threw him into a dark, cramped prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow, they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the interrogation, designed to extract information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had extracted what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the execution. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind conjured increasingly vivid scenarios of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this torment. The warrior paced his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of impending doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master were sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real, it is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so concrete, so inevitable? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to penetrate deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a profound peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more confining than the stone walls around him, the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless scenarios about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds evolved as survival mechanisms, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this capacity serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental projections for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from vivid imaginings of future scenarios that may never occur? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist primarily in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic negotiations would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined anxiety. When we truly inhabit the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention transformed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering transformed into peace. This transformation is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air, are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own. Now, let us explore a story about the nature of genuine assistance and the goal of true teaching. This is the encounter between the psychiatrist and the Zen master. At a gathering of professionals and spiritual teachers, a psychiatrist found himself in conversation with a renowned Zen master. The psychiatrist had built his career on helping people work through their psychological difficulties, analyzing their problems, and providing therapeutic interventions designed to improve their mental health and emotional well-being. Curious about how different approaches to helping might compare, the psychiatrist decided to ask the master a direct question that had been on his mind throughout their conversation. "I've spent years learning various techniques for helping people with their emotional and psychological struggles," the psychiatrist said. "I'm curious about your approach. Exactly how do you help people?" The master listened to the question with the same calm attention he brought to everything, considering not just the words but the assumptions underlying them. After a moment of thoughtful silence, he offered a response that was both simple and profound. "I get them to a place where they can't ask any more questions," the master replied. The psychiatrist paused, uncertain whether this was meant as a serious answer or perhaps some kind of Zen riddle. "I'm not sure I understand," he said. "Surely questioning is important in any process of growth and understanding." The master smiled gently. Questions arise from the mind that believes it lacks something. When someone reaches the place where questions naturally cease, they have found what they were truly seeking all along. Buddha's wisdom tells us, doubt everything, find your own light. Yet this ancient teaching reveals a paradox. True finding comes not through endless questioning, but through arriving at a completeness where questions become unnecessary. Why do we assume that helping people means providing answers to their questions, when the deepest healing might involve dissolving the questioner itself? Zen Buddhism points to the possibility that many of our problems exist only because we continue to ask the questions that create and maintain them. The psychiatrist's approach, like that of most helping professions, focuses on analyzing problems, understanding their origins, and developing strategies for managing or resolving them. This method has value and can provide genuine relief for many forms of suffering. But the master's approach suggests something more radical. Helping people transcend the very framework that generates their problems. Consider the endless questions that occupy your own mind. How can I be happier? Why do I keep making the same mistakes? What should I do with my life? How can I find meaning? Each question implies a questioner who lacks something, who needs something, who must figure something out. But what if the questioner itself is the source of the seeking? In Zen practice, we discover that many of our problems are maintained by the very effort to solve them. The mind that constantly asks, "How can I find peace?" is the same mind that disturbs the peace that is naturally present. The person who desperately seeks enlightenment may be reinforcing the very sense of separation that creates the feeling of being unenlightened. The master's method of getting people where they can't ask any more questions isn't about suppressing inquiry or promoting ignorance. Rather, it's about guiding people to a direct experience of completeness where questions naturally dissolve because there's nothing more to seek. Zen Master Bankai taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle anything that comes up." When someone truly realizes their fundamental completeness, questions about how to be complete simply cease to arise. Problems don't need to be solved. They're recognized as temporary appearances in the vast space of awareness. This doesn't mean practical questions disappear entirely. What should I have for lunch? Or, which route should I take to work? Are functional questions that serve practical purposes. The questions that cease are the existential ones that arise from a fundamental sense of lack or incompleteness. The Buddha said, "There is nothing to do, nothing to gain, nothing to lose." This teaching points to the same understanding the Master was indicating. True help comes not from giving people more to do or figure out, but from helping them realize they are already what they seek. Look deeply at your own relationship with questions and seeking. How much of your mental energy goes toward trying to solve the problem of your life rather than living it? What would remain if you stopped asking the questions that assume something is fundamentally wrong or missing? The psychiatrist helps by analyzing and providing tools. The master helps by pointing to what needs no analysis or improvement. Both approaches can serve, but the master's method aims for the root rather than the branches. dissolving the seeker rather than satisfying the seeking. Tonight, as you notice the questions that typically occupy your mind, can you sense what lies beneath them? Can you find the space of awareness that exists prior to all questions? The completeness that needs no answers because it lacks nothing. As the Buddha observed, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The deepest help we can receive or offer others is the recognition that what we seek has never been absent. Questions cease, not because they've been answered, but because the one who was asking them discovers there was never actually anything to ask about. Now, let us experience a Zen story about the unexpected nature of enlightenment. This is the kitchen monk's realization. In the serene mountains surrounding Lake Hakone stood a great monastery known throughout Japan for its rigorous practice and deep wisdom. Among the monks lived a humble man named Ichi, whose life would teach us about the profound difference between seeking and finding. For 55 years, Ichi had labored faithfully in the monastery kitchen, while other monks sat in formal meditation or engaged in scholarly debates. Ichi chopped vegetables, tended fires, and prepared meals with quiet dedication. His hands had grown permanently stained, his back bent from years of service, yet he approached each task with careful attention. But Ichi carried a heavy burden. Since his earliest days, he had been assigned a koan, one of those paradoxical questions that Zen masters use to crack open the thinking mind. His was the famous puzzle: what is the sound of one hand clapping? Day after day, year after year, he wrestled with this question, trying to solve it through logic, intuition, every approach his mind could devise. As decades passed, Ichi began to see himself as a failure. While other monks seemed to progress, receiving new koans or achieving insights their teachers acknowledged, Ichi remained stuck with his unsolved puzzle. He watched younger monks arrive and eventually surpass him in status and recognition. 55 years, he would whisper while stirring soup. 55 years, and still I cannot hear what one hand sounds like when it claps. The question haunted him through every chore, every quiet moment, every season of his long service. Now, as his body grew frail, Ichi knew his time was approaching its end. He had been moved to a small attic room where he could rest away from daily bustle. As he lay there, in the gathering twilight of his life, something unexpected began to happen. Gradually, the familiar weight of striving began to lift from his chest. The desperate need to solve his koan, the shame of perceived failure, the constant reaching for enlightenment, all of it slowly dissolved like mist at sunrise. Gone was the fierce desire for awakening that had driven him for decades. In place of all that seeking, Ichi discovered something he had never expected, a profound peace that seemed to cradle his entire being. The soft darkness felt not like defeat, but like the gentlest embrace. His breathing slowed, and with it, the churning of thoughts that had occupied his mind for so many years. It was in this exquisite silence, when there remained no more questions nor need for answers, when even the need for breathing seemed to fade into quiet acceptance, that Ichi finally heard it. The whooshing silence of one hand clapping filled his awareness, not as a sound, but as the very nature of existence itself, the sound that had been present all along beneath all the noise of seeking. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Cease to cherish opinions, and you will achieve enlightenment." Here we discover that enlightenment isn't something we attain through effort, but something we uncover when the effort finally ceases. Why do we struggle so intensely with the very seeking that prevents us from finding what we seek? The mind creates a fundamental split between the seeker and the sought, keeping us perpetually reaching for something we imagine exists elsewhere, in some future moment when we'll finally get it. Ichi's story illuminates what Zen calls beginner's mind, the fresh awareness that exists before we complicate it with goals and achievements. For 55 years, he had sophisticated simple presence into complex spiritual ambition. The more expertly he sought enlightenment, the further he moved from the naturally enlightened awareness that had been with him all along. Consider how often we create this pattern. We complicate natural joy with the pursuit of happiness. We obscure natural love with the search for perfect relationships. We cover natural wisdom with endless accumulation of knowledge. Ichi's realization came not through solving his koan, but through finally letting go of the need to solve it. The sound of one hand clapping isn't a riddle to be figured out, but an invitation to rest in the space before thinking begins. The awareness that exists prior to questions and answers. Tonight, as thoughts about your own spiritual journey arise, remember Ichi's profound discovery. What if the very awareness that notices your seeking is the enlightenment you've been seeking? The sound of one hand clapping might be closer than you think, in the very listening that hears all sounds, including silence. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Sometimes the greatest achievement is the willingness to stop achieving and simply rest in what has always been present. Now let us explore a story about the power of belief and the destiny we create through faith itself. This is the tale of the general and the coin that revealed truth. A Japanese general faced an impossible situation. His army was greatly outnumbered by enemy forces. The terrain favored his opponents, and by every conventional measure of military strategy, the coming battle should result in devastating defeat. Yet something deep within him remained convinced that victory was possible. Perhaps it was intuition, perhaps it was desperate hope, but he felt certain that his cause was just, and his troops, though fewer in number, possessed a fighting spirit that could overcome the odds. The problem was his soldiers. They could count as well as he could, and they had eyes to see the massive force arrayed against them. Fear rippled through their ranks like a contagion. Doubt clouded their faces. Whispered conversations filled with pessimism spread through the camp, and the general could sense that their morale was crumbling before the battle had even begun. He knew that an army convinced of its own defeat would indeed be defeated, regardless of any other factors. Technical skill, superior weapons, even numerical advantage means nothing when soldiers have already surrendered in their hearts. But an army that truly believed in its victory could accomplish seemingly impossible things through the sheer force of that conviction. On the morning of the battle, as they marched toward their destiny, the general led his troops to a small religious shrine that stood beside the road. This was a place where countless warriors had stopped over the centuries to pray before facing uncertain fate. The general gathered his men around him and led them in earnest prayer, asking for divine blessing and protection in the coming fight. When the prayers were finished, the general reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple coin. He held it high so that every soldier could see it clearly. "My brothers," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks. "We have prayed, and now we will let heaven itself reveal our destiny. I will toss this coin into the air. If it lands heads, We are fated to win this battle. If it lands tails, we are destined to lose. Let us discover what the gods have decided for us." The soldiers pressed closer, their breathing shallow with anticipation. Everything seemed to depend on this single moment, this one flip of metal spinning through the morning air. The general tossed the coin high, and every eye followed its arc as it rose, hung suspended for an instant against the sky, then fell back, down to earth. The coin landed and lay still in the dust. It was heads. A cheer erupted from the troops that could probably be heard for miles. Soldiers who had been grim and fearful moments before now laughed with joy and embraced each other with renewed confidence. The gods had spoken. Victory was assured. Their cause was blessed by heaven itself. Filled with this divine confidence, the soldiers attacked their enemies with such fierce determination and coordinated power that they achieved exactly what the coin had predicted. Against all odds, they won a decisive victory, routing forces much larger than their own and securing a triumph that would be remembered for generations. After the battle, as the general walked among his celebrating troops, his lieutenant approached him with wonder in his eyes. "General," the lieutenant said, "what an incredible thing. The coin revealed our true destiny, just as you said it would. Surely no human power can change what heaven has decreed." "You are absolutely right," the general replied with a knowing smile. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the coin, holding it so his lieutenant could examine it closely. "No one can change destiny." The lieutenant looked at the coin and gasped. Both sides showed heads. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become." Here we discover the profound truth that destiny is not something that happens to us, but something we create through the power of our own beliefs and expectations. Why do we so readily assume that fate is beyond our influence, when our own minds play such a crucial role in shaping what unfolds? Zen Buddhism teaches that while we cannot control all external circumstances, we have tremendous power over the internal conditions that determine how we respond to whatever arises. The general understood something profound about human psychology and the nature of reality itself. He knew that his soldiers' belief in victory was more important than their numerical disadvantage. He recognized that confidence, determination, and fighting spirit could overcome superior numbers when those qualities were genuinely present. But here's the deeper teaching. The general didn't simply manipulate his troops through deception. He created the conditions that allowed their natural courage and strength to emerge. The soldiers possessed the ability to fight brilliantly all along. They simply needed to believe in themselves and their cause. Consider your own relationship with destiny and possibility. How often do you assume that outcomes are predetermined, that success or failure is beyond your influence? The general's two-headed coin represents the power we all possess to tip the scales in favor of positive outcomes through the quality of our engagement with life. This doesn't mean we can control everything through positive thinking, or that believing in something makes it automatically true. The soldiers still had to fight the battle. They still had to demonstrate actual skill and courage. But their belief in victory created the psychological conditions that allowed their best qualities to manifest. In Zen practice, we learn to work skillfully with both effort and surrender, both intention and acceptance. We recognize that while we cannot dictate specific outcomes, we can profoundly influence the energy and attention we bring to any situation. This quality of engagement often determines whether we experience success or failure, regardless of external circumstances. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The general was wise enough to see that his soldiers' thoughts about the battle were more influential than their thoughts about their numerical disadvantage. He worked with the reality of psychology rather than fighting against it. Look deeply at the various challenges and opportunities in your own life. Where might you be carrying a tails mentality, assuming defeat before you fully engaged, focusing on obstacles rather than possibilities, letting fear determine your level of effort? And where might you need to create your own two-headed coin, a practice or perspective that consistently orients you toward positive engagement regardless of circumstances? The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This isn't magical thinking, but recognition of the creative power of consciousness itself. When we approach situations with genuine confidence, clarity, and commitment, we often discover capabilities we didn't know we possessed. Tonight, as you consider the battles you're facing and the outcomes you're hoping for, can you find your own version of the general's wisdom? Can you create internal conditions that support your highest possibilities rather than your deepest fears? Can you recognize that while you cannot control destiny, you have profound influence over the beliefs and attitudes that shape how destiny unfolds through you? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The general's confidence lit the flame of belief in every soldier's heart. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is create the conditions that allow others and ourselves to discover the strength that was there all along. Let us now turn to a story about the relationship between outer circumstances and inner cultivation. This is the tale of the horse and the mind. In a remote mountain region where execution grounds served as sobering reminders of mortality, Zen master Bankai sought to test the depth of his spiritual realization. For several nights, he sat in meditation beneath a wooden crucifix, using the proximity of death to penetrate more deeply into the nature of existence. After completing this intense retreat, Bankai made his way to a nearby area where he could rest. He found a peaceful spot on an embankment surrounding a horse corral where he lay down to continue his contemplation under the open sky. As he rested there, absorbed in profound silence, a harsh sound shattered his peace. From within the corral came the violent sounds of a warrior brutally beating his horse. The animal's cries mixed with the sharp crack of a whip and angry shouts of a man losing control. Master Bankai observed this scene with growing concern. The warrior was clearly frustrated, taking out his inner turmoil on the innocent animal. Each blow seemed to make the horse more agitated rather than more compliant, creating a vicious cycle of violence and resistance. Unable to remain silent, Bankai called out from his position, "Hey, what do you think you are doing?" The warrior, absorbed in rage, ignored the interruption and continued his harsh treatment. The beating intensified, and so did Bankai's concern for both the animal and the man degrading himself through such cruelty. "Hey!" Bankai called out again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years cultivating inner peace. "What do you think you are doing?" Still, the warrior continued, lost in frustration and anger. The horse became increasingly panicked, which only seemed to fuel the man's determination to force compliance through violence. A third time, Bankai's voice rang out. "Hey! What do you think you are doing?" This time, something in the master's tone penetrated the warrior's rage. The man stopped his beating, climbed down from his horse, and approached the embankment. As he drew closer, his expression changed. There was something about this stranger that commanded respect, a quality of presence that spoke of deep, inner development. "You were yelling at me," the warrior said, his voice still carrying traces of anger, but now mixed with curiosity. "Do you have something to tell me?" Banki looked at the man with compassion, seeing not an enemy, but someone caught in the same cycles of frustration that trap us all. His response was simple yet profound. "Rather than beat your horse for being unruly, why not chastise yourself and train your own mind right?" The words hung in the air between them, like a bridge connecting two very different approaches to dealing with difficulty. The warrior had been trying to solve his problem through external force and control. Bankai was pointing to an entirely different possibility. As the Buddha observed, conquer anger with non-anger, conquer badness with goodness, conquer meanness with generosity, conquer dishonesty with truth. This teaching captures the essence of what Bankai offered the frustrated warrior. The recognition that our external struggles mirror our internal state. What emerges from this story is the profound insight that we cannot successfully force the world to conform to our expectations through aggression or control. The warrior's approach, beating the horse into submission, represents how we often try to manage difficult circumstances in our own lives. We become frustrated with external conditions and respond with force, criticism, or manipulation, never recognizing that the real work lies within. Why do we instinctively blame external circumstances for our frustration? Buddhist psychology explains that the untrained mind seeks to maintain its comfort by controlling its environment, rather than developing the flexibility to respond skillfully to whatever arises. This creates what Zen calls pushing the river, exhausting ourselves, trying to force reality to match our preferences. Consider how this pattern manifests in daily life. The computer that crashes during an important project becomes the target of our anger, when the real issue is our attachment to having technology work perfectly. The traffic jam that makes us late triggers road rage, when the actual problem is our expectation that travel should always be smooth. The family member who doesn't respond to our advice becomes the focus of our frustration, when the deeper issue is our need to control others' choices. In each case, we're like the warrior beating the horse, applying force to external circumstances while ignoring the internal conditions that create our suffering. The horse represents the uncontrollable aspects of life: other people's behavior, natural events, technological failures, and the inherent unpredictability of existence. Zen teacher Pema Chodron writes, "You are the sky, everything else is just the weather." This points to the same truth Bankei offered the warrior. Instead of trying to control the weather of external circumstances, we can develop the spacious awareness that remains calm regardless of conditions. The real training involves learning to work with our own minds, rather than trying to force compliance from the world around us. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting harmful situations, but rather approaching challenges from a place of inner stability rather than reactive frustration. Buddhist practice offers specific techniques for this internal training. Mindfulness meditation teaches us to observe our reactive patterns without being swept away by them. Loving kindness practice develops compassion for ourselves and others when things don't go as planned. Contemplation of impermanence helps us accept the changeable nature of all conditions. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable frustrations of daily life, can you remember Bankai's teaching? When you find yourself wanting to beat the horse of difficult circumstances, can you pause and ask, what would it mean to train my own mind instead? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. The path to peace lies not in conquering external conditions, but in cultivating the inner qualities that remain stable, regardless of what the world presents. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and lived experience. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen communities. Before a wandering monk could receive lodging for the night, he had to engage in what was called Dharma combat, with either the abbot or a designated representative. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual wit and understanding, where profound questions and paradoxical answers revealed the depth of each participant's realization. At one renowned monastery nestled in bamboo forests, a travel-worn monk arrived as evening shadows began to lengthen across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The abbot, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal attendant to conduct the traditional Dharma encounter. This attendant had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he possessed what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limitation, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed profound insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal reception hall, the traveling monk proposed something unusual. "Let us engage in silent debate," he suggested, gesturing with his hands to indicate they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths transcend language altogether. The attendant nodded agreement, and they began their wordless exchange. The wayfarer raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with an expression of calm confidence. Without hesitation, the attendant responded by raising two fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the attendant surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident expression faltered. For a moment, he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something approaching alarm. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the abbot and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Venerable Sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The abbot raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please, tell me what transpired in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to symbolize the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers, indicating the Buddha and the Dharma, both the teacher and the teachings he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete triple gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. the community of practitioners. But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all three are actually one unified reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek instruction elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here. The abbot listened to this interpretation with growing surprise, for he knew his attendant's character well. As the traveling monk departed into the gathering dusk, the attendant himself appeared, visibly agitated and breathing hard from running. "Where is that insolent rascal?" he demanded, his single eye blazing with indignation. "I've been looking everywhere for him. The nerve of that man! I've never encountered such rudeness disguised as spiritual inquiry." "What exactly happened?" the abbot asked, genuinely curious now about what had transpired between these two very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the attendant explained, his voice rising with remembered offense, "he insulted me by holding up one finger to indicate that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? Here I thought we were engaging in spiritual discourse, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limitation. Determined to remain polite despite such crudeness, I held up two fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with two eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no ill will for his thoughtless comment." The attendant paused to catch his breath, his agitation increasing as he continued. "But the scoundrel wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up three fingers to rub it in further, indicating that between the two of us, there were only three eyes total. He was deliberately emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That's when I'd had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his persistent rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners." The abbot stood in stunned silence, contemplating this remarkable demonstration of how two people could participate in identical events while inhabiting completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This profound truth reveals itself in the complete misunderstanding between our two monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These psychological forces create internal weather systems that color our perception of everything around us. The attendant's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong interpretive framework that he couldn't perceive any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual preoccupations caused him to see profound Dharma teachings in what were actually expressions of wounded feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened instruction made him interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as increasingly sophisticated wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or persistent hopes cause you to misread situations completely? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes evidence they don't like you when they're actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you're insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our internal state creates our external experience. Both monks were sincere in their perceptions, yet both were fundamentally mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying, or deliberately misinterpreting. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own psychological conditioning. The story points us toward a crucial question. How can we develop the capacity to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what's called don't know mind. Maintaining openness to multiple interpretations, rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The attendant might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his perception. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine the very mind that creates these interpretations, rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." If the attendant had met the traveler's perceived insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, if the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their encounter might have become a genuine teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our internal weather creates our external storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and compassion. Tonight, as we draw these stories to a close, can you feel how the calm you've discovered isn't something you need to chase or achieve, but something that was always there, waiting quietly in your own awareness? Can you sense that the wisdom you've touched through these tales doesn't live only in ancient monasteries or distant mountains, but right here in your own mind, available whenever you remember to look? The Buddha taught us, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. This truth reminds us that clarity and contentment don't require perfect conditions or special knowledge, but grow naturally from our willingness to meet this moment with open attention. Each story tonight has pointed to the same simple revelation: that struggle softens when we stop fighting reality, that freedom appears when we let go of what we cannot control, and that genuine peace unfolds when we see through our habitual patterns of resistance. Even when your thoughts wander, even when old worries try to resurface, the understanding you've absorbed tonight has taken root in your awareness, ready to offer guidance whenever you need it most. These aren't just stories to remember, but invitations to live differently, to respond rather than react, to find stillness in the midst of whatever comes. Notice, as you settle into rest, that these ancient lessons haven't revealed some distant goal, but have shown you how to be fully here, fully present, exactly as you are. In this gentle quiet that surrounds you now, can you feel how your breathing has deepened, how your body has relaxed, and how your mind has found its natural rhythm? As you carry this peace with you into tomorrow and beyond, remember that you take with you not just the stories themselves, but the deeper understanding they've awakened in your own experience. May this quiet confidence stay with you, supporting you through whatever challenges or joys lie ahead. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.